On a cold January day, Brian Holst sat down with Kevin Boss to discuss the hobby, their mutual interest in John Deere machines, and Kevin's upcoming auction.
So let's talk about the combine collection. I know you got pull-type combines, you got corn pickers, you've got the 300 Husker I know is coming up on the auction. You also got the self-propelled combines, right up to the 105 hydro diesel with all the bells and whistles with a quick attach front end or front header. You know, that's something pretty astounding.
Yeah, and I started out with the corn pickers. You know, basically my goal was to have one of every model that Deere made, and I did. Now, believe it or not, you know, a lot of people ask me, you know, well, what's that amount to, 6 or 7? And I said, no, it's 18. You know, there was 18
models. Different John Deere corn pickers.
Corn picker models.
Wow.
And so I did have all of them, and I'm still keeping, you know, the rare, more unusual stuff. Mm-hmm. You know, people have to realize that the auction isn't my collection. You know, the auction is the stuff that I can do without or I can replace.
Okay.
You know, the idea of the auction was to, I'm trying to amass monies for other endeavors.
Other projects, yes. Exactly. But I want to go back to those 18 different model combines or corn pickers that you had. Those weren't just corn pickers to sit. All those corn pickers were field operational.
They were all field operational but one, and I'm still working on trying to find an elevator to make it operational. I have one of them that is not operational, but otherwise, yes, they were all functional, and they have been used. They have all been in the field at one time or another.
Wow. I know that's pretty amazing within itself. A lot of people get them all dressed up, and
a lot of that, Brian, is kind of that same way. You know, once you've completed the goal, you know.
Next.
Exactly, and I'm kind of that way. You know, I see a goal that I want to meet. You meet it, and then I'm just sad. You know, that satisfactory thing for that goal has been met, and I'm ready to move on to something different.
Move on to another one. Well, that was kind of the same way with that the portable corn crib.
Yes.
I remember that when I first come out here one time, and you said, I think I'm going to do this, and I just looked at you, go, you're going to do what? You're going to make a portable corn picker or a corn crib. This I got to see. So tell me how that all come about.
You know, it started with the fact that I had learned that John Deere, which at that time I was collecting Deere only, I had learned that John Deere had made inside cupped elevators for corn cribs. Mm-hmm. And I always thought that that was another part of farming, that if you go to an old farm and you see a crib with an inside elevator, that was the richier farmers at the time that could afford those things. And I always thought that would make a really good display at a show, and I knew that not a lot of people knew that Deere even made an inside cupped elevator. So we had to come up with a way to display that elevator, and that's what it turned into, was a whole crib. Now, the original design was the elevator, but when you start a project like that, sometimes you get ventured off, and it's a necessity more than, I didn't really want all the optional things that I put on the crib, but it was a necessity to make it operational.
Okay.
Which again, I was into I want this thing to lift a wagon. I want that wagon lift to be able to support and pick up a wagon load of corn. I want to be able to move the corn. I want to be able to shell the corn, grind it. Mm-hmm. I want all these features to work. So you start with those things, and you kind of have an open mind for engineering, is what I call that. Open-minded engineering. So don't get stuck on a rut, because you may just have to drop the whole project. So we moved things around and made it work. And while you're doing that, you got to keep in mind, how am I going to move it? Mm-hmm. So, half the battle was making it usable, so that this thing was portable enough to take to shows and set up and tear down. Now, it's not a quick set up or tear down,
right?
But it's not terrible either.
Because you said it takes, what, 2 to 4 hours depending on the crew
you
that
can
you have
set
with you?
up, with a couple guys that have done it before, you can set the whole thing up in about 4.5 hours. But a lot of the smalls take more time than the 7 or 8 large pieces. The 7 or 8 large pieces in an hour and a half or 2 hours, you can have it pretty well ready to go.
Because not only, like you said, is the bucket elevator, you have the wagon lift, you have the sheller, for the ear corn, and then from the sheller it goes to the grinder.
Yes.
All those take power sources. I know you got jack shafts, you got power shafts, and that's all powered with?
The wagon lift and the inside cupped elevator right now, I've got it running with I use a 1.5 horse hit and miss engine. But it could be used with an old open armature electric motor.
Okay, that was always a possibility back in the day.
The jack shaft that I'm using right now is actually for an electric motor.
Okay.
And that's why it turns the speed it does. Because for one thing, I didn't want it to turn at full rate because your demonstration doesn't last very long.
Right, you're not in production.
No, I'm not trying to unload a wagon in 3 minutes, so I'm trying to make it last longer. So with the jack shafting I use and the speed of the hit and miss motor versus the speed of an electric motor slowed me down to about 1/3 of the actual speed.
Got it.
So that powers the elevator and the wagon lift. Now, like I said, originally it could have been electric. It could have had a line shaft run outside. I've seen people do that with a speed jack and a tractor. The hammer mill grinder I've got set with a door in the end of the crib and a flat belt. And that came from a neighboring corn crib. When I was a kid, I did chores for a neighbor, and we ground ear corn once a week for the cattle. And he had an old Super M, and you opened the door in the crib and you rolled the belt out. The burr mill was mounted in the crib, and you once a week ground ear corn in the crib. So that's kind of where that feature came from, that I've got the door and you roll the belt out. Okay. It was something I had seen.
Wow, unbelievable. And this is all transportable. It loads onto a gooseneck trailer. I know right now you have it stored on a running gear.
Yeah, I've got it. What it fits in is it fits in an 8-foot wide and 16-foot long area. So that leaves you trailer room for a loader, or if you want to take a sheller or other tractors with, there's room to put other things on your trailer.
Wow, that whole display breaks down to something that small.
Yes.
That is kind of neat.
And sometimes at a show, that's half the show. Between setting it up and tearing it down, I've had people that have sat and watched and come over and said that was more interesting than the crib itself.
It's definitely a choreographed event, because I've seen you set it up several times at several shows, and I know you have a pretty dedicated crew that tends to go with you, and they just know exactly what the next step is. I know you take your little compact utility tractor.
I've got a little compact utility tractor, and the pieces all also had to be modeled to fit the lift capacities of that tractor. So we had some things we had to change later on through the course of it to make it so the tractor would load and unload the whole crib by itself.
Because not every show you go to has the ability to lift some of that stuff.
And I didn't know if I wanted to trust other people's loaders to, because I was a little safety conscious of the thing. Mm-hmm. Some of the stuff is built in the feet under the, there's a whole footing underneath the elevator that helps it stand up. It's not as, if you walk by and look at it, you think it looks a little wobbly, but it's actually
quite stable.
It's quite stable, actually.